My name is Eliza. Love, to me, was always a quiet force, something you feel in the smallest actions rather than grand gestures. I didn't know how deeply love could transform a person until I met Adrian. I was 25 and working as a caregiver in a small town's elder care center. My days were filled with smiles and stories from the elderly, but my evenings were quiet and solitary. My world revolved around kindness, yet I felt something missing. A connection, perhaps. Adrian came into my life unexpectedly. He was there visiting his grandmother, Mrs. Whitaker, a sweet lady with a mischievous smile who often told me tales of her youth. Adrian would visit her every weekend, bringing her books and her favorite chocolates. He wasn't just kind to her. He'd greet every resident, sit with them, and genuinely listen to their stories. I noticed how respectful he was, how he treated everyone with the same warmth and care. He didn't see age or frailty. He saw people. It was rare, and it drew me to him. One rainy afternoon, as I was helping Mrs. Whitaker knit a scarf, Adrian arrived, soaking wet. He had forgotten his umbrella, but instead of complaining, he laughed it off and said, "I guess the rain decided I needed a bath." His lightheartedness was infectious. "Eliza, you're off in an hour, right?" Mrs. Whitaker asked with a knowing glint in her eye. Before I could respond, she added, "Adrian can give you a ride home. It's pouring out there." I tried to decline, but Adrian insisted. "It's no trouble," he said, his smile genuine. That's how our first conversation began. In the car, we talked about everything. Books, music, the little joys of life. By the time we reached my apartment, I felt as though I'd known him forever. From that day on, Adrian and I became friends. He'd often stay after visiting his grandmother to help me with small tasks, lifting heavy boxes or fixing a loose chair leg. He wasn't just helping with work. He was helping me feel less alone. Over time, I started to notice how much Adrian cared for everyone around him. When one of the elderly residents had a bad day, Adrian would bring them flowers or a cheerful book. He respected their dignity, their stories, and their lives. It wasn't just kindness. It was a deep sense of respect and empathy. One evening, while cleaning up after dinner at the care center, Adrian stayed back to help. As we worked side by side, I told him about my father, who had passed away when I was young. I shared how he used to encourage me to help others, and how his words had shaped my life. Adrian listened intently, his eyes soft with understanding. "He sounds like a remarkable man," Adrian said, his voice gentle, "and you've carried his legacy beautifully, Eliza." Those words stayed with me. Adrian didn't just listen. He made me feel seen and valued. Slowly, my feelings for him deepened. But I wasn't sure if he felt the same way, and I was too afraid to risk our friendship. One day, Mrs. Whitaker fell seriously ill. She was moved to the hospital, and Adrian's visits became more frequent. He spent hours by her side, holding her hand and reading her favorite poems. His love for his grandmother was unwavering, and it made me admire him even more. When Mrs. Whitaker passed away, Adrian was heartbroken. I stayed with him through the funeral, offering quiet support. He didn't speak much, but one evening, as we sat on a park bench under a starlit sky, he turned to me and said, "Thank you for being here, Eliza. I don't think I could have gotten through this without you." I looked into his tear-filled eyes and saw something I hadn't dared to hope for. Love. It wasn't loud or overwhelming. It was tender and steady, just like Adrian. "You've been there for me too," I replied softly, "more than you know." In that moment, something shifted between us. It wasn't a confession, but an unspoken understanding that our bond had grown into something neither of us could ignore. Life moved forward, but now Adrian and I were moving through it together. Adrian and I started spending more time together. What began as shared moments of grief evolved into a deep connection. We supported each other in ways I never thought possible. Adrian's respect for my work and his quiet acts of kindness made me feel cherished in a way I had never experienced. One afternoon, as we were sitting in a small cafe near the care center, Adrian shared something I hadn't known. "When I was younger," he began, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly, "I used to visit my grandfather at a similar center, but I never gave him enough time. I always thought there would be more chances, more tomorrows." He paused, his expression thoughtful. "When my grandmother moved here, I promised myself I'd do better. That's why I admire you, Eliza. You give so much of yourself every single day. It's inspiring." His words touched me deeply. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. "You've shown more care and love here than most people ever do. Your grandmother saw that, and so do I." Our bond continued to grow. Adrian began volunteering at the care center on weekends, helping with activities and brightening the residents' days. The elderly adored him, and I often caught them teasing him about when he'd make an honest woman out of me. We'd laugh it off, but deep down, their words planted a seed in my heart. One day, as we were setting up for a small garden party at the care center, Adrian surprised me. He had built a wooden bench and engraved a quote from Mrs. Whitaker's favorite poem. "Love is not bound by time, but by the depth of its care." He placed it under a large oak tree where she used to sit. It was his way of honoring her memory and giving the residents a special place to reflect. "It's beautiful," I said, my voice thick with emotion. She would have loved this. Adrian smiled, his eyes meeting mine. "She taught me that love is in the little things, a kind word, a gentle touch, or just being there. And, Eliza, you've shown me that too." In that moment, I realized how deeply I had fallen for him. It wasn't just his actions or words, but the way he respected and uplifted everyone around him, including me. A few weeks later, Adrian invited me to dinner at a cozy restaurant. Over candlelight and soft music, he reached for my hand. "Eliza, you've brought so much light into my life. Your kindness, your strength. It's changed me in ways I can't explain. I never want to lose this, to lose us." Tears welled up in my eyes as I squeezed his hand. "You've changed my life too, Adrian. You've shown me a love that's gentle, patient, and true." From that night on, we were inseparable. Our love grew not through grand declarations, but through quiet moments of understanding and shared purpose. Adrian continued volunteering, and together we organized events and projects to make the residents' lives brighter. The care center became more than a workplace for me. It became a second home, filled with love and laughter. Months turned into years, and Adrian and I built a life rooted in mutual respect and unwavering support. We got married under the oak tree with the engraved bench, surrounded by the residents and staff who had become our family. Life wasn't always easy, but we faced every challenge together. Adrian's love was my anchor, and I was his. Our story wasn't about grand gestures or fairy tale romance. It was about finding strength in each other and building a love that lasted through every season. Even now, as I sit on the bench under the oak tree, watching the sun filter through the leaves, I'm reminded of the lessons Adrian and I learned together. Love is respect. Love is kindness. And love is the quiet strength that carries us through life's storms. If you liked my story, please like, share, and subscribe. I'll see you in the next story.